Audition from 1999 does horror my favorite way to do horror. It pretends to be something else for the first 45 minutes. We're drawn very slowly and carefully into the plight of Aoyoma, a widowed father with a teenage son battling loneliness that seems to be all around him in contemporary Japan.
日本中みんな寂しいんです。君もか。社長もでしょ。
When even his son begins encouraging him to remarry, Aoyoma enlists the help of a television producer friend who suggests a staged audition for a fake film. Through this process, they'll secretly screen for Aoyama's new wife. Even before the audition is conducted, he finds himself intrigued by a former dancer named Asami. The audition sequence itself is a masterclass of subtle tension and showing rather than telling. In the initial auditions in the montage, the focus is more on the women and their responses to the prying questions, with quick reaction shots of the men. When Asami enters, somewhat curiously for a character intro, the camera is suddenly taking her POV on Aoyoma. Miike is subtly telling us that the dynamic has shifted. Suddenly Aoyoma is the one oversharing and embarrassing himself, and after Asami leaves, he even goes and sits in the chair. Aoyoma finds himself smitten rather quickly, and the two end up in a whirlwind romance that seems a little too good to be true, and leading psychologists agree that's not always a good sign. The closer the two get, the more fragmented and bizarre the filmmaking becomes. Aoyama's dead wife judges and warns him from photographs and daydreams. The second date is full of jump cuts. The full restaurant suddenly empties. The third date features music that's a little out of key and menacing. There are weird survival horror angles from the ceiling that continue afterwards, refracting the delicate sensibilities of a Japanese domestic drama through a funhouse mirror. The sheets when the two first make love crash like waves, and after static and locked-off camera work for most of the film, Miike goes handheld once Asami mysteriously disappears the next morning. This whole slow burn opening is just one of many things that makes Audition such an immensely satisfying movie, which sounds a little terrifying and psychotic to admit, but it is, in less than obvious ways. As a viewer in 2024 especially, you know its grisly reputation, and for the first 45 minutes you're waiting for it to earn that reputation. It sprinkles a breadcrumb trail of almost creepy or concerning shit in the margins, and when that's all paid off, there's an immense sense of catharsis, like a detective's suspicions in a whodunit being confirmed. Interactions and conversations in the film are full of revealing hints about characters that reward you for paying attention, especially in repeat viewings. Miike worked with both leads in a very private, one-on-one fashion. His process expended more effort trying to get to know both actors as people, and understand their perspectives on relationships rather than talking about the characters. What Asami ultimately does to Aoyoma is horrific and unspeakable, but so is the abusive, torturous childhood that shaped her. Miike interpreted the Murakami novel upon which the film is based as a love letter to women who are models, a plea for empathy for what they regularly go through. Murakami, who himself dated a woman he auditioned for a film, even confirmed this. Miike frequently shows Asami as a child, sometimes participating in the present drama through clever editing techniques to continue to make it difficult for us to dismiss her outright as an evil villain.
そう、あさってのヒロインたちはあなたと同じ時間を生きています。いいえ、あさってのヒロイン、それはあなた自身なのかもしれない。
The men of Audition are also hardly saints. The film's earliest scenes do subtle work to make them seem a little predatory, with Aoyoma and his son comparing catching fish to catching women and joking about the fish's ovaries after cooking it for dinner. Women are described as stupid, common, and full of themselves. Choosing a woman is compared to choosing a car, and to do that, two powerful men dishonestly set up a seemingly professional opportunity in a lottery odds industry, abusing women's enthusiasm and goodwill, as well as the power dynamic of the situation. That part of the story lingers in a different way in 2024.
なんか犯罪者になったような気分だ。
As does Aoyoma flicking through the audition files after hours, as someone today might flick through Hinge or LinkedIn pages or Mandy. Audition is prescient in its exploration of the ways society commodifies people, boiling us down into simple, usually vastly misleading spark notes. In the edit, Audition also interrupts the tension of its most intense climactic sequence to reveal information Aoyoma has repressed about Asami and himself. After he realizes he's been drugged, the film sustains the suspense, taking us out of it and leaving it bubbling on the stove in the background, while inviting us into the state of Aoyama's murky subconscious in surrealistic fashion. Asami is clearly not who we thought she was, but this segment of the film suggests she's actually been telling Aoyoma more directly who she is all along, and he merely brushed it off, sank another whiskey or beer, and didn't think anything of it. Another great subplot turned on its head in this sequence involves Aoyama's secretary. Throughout the movie, she makes less than subtle passes at him and tries to get him talking. He responds rather stiffly and tries to avoid her. Our initial reading of things is that she's just a lonely woman with a crush, not taking the hint that he's just not that into it. But it turns out he had sex with her and then just pretended nothing ever happened. It recontextualizes their entire relationship for the audience, a clever inversion of what's happening with Asami at the same time. It's an interesting choice for a movie and a director so associated with shock value and cruelty to pull us out of the worst of it and say, this is what shaped these people and this is who they are.
ホラーとバイオレンスの監督だっていう、実はそんな撮ってないんですよね。ホラーの数も3本か4本しかないと思うし、北米のディレクターたちはやっぱり三池隆これだろうって、バイオレンスとホラーの、あ、俺本当はそうじゃないのに何かそういうふうに思われてるんだっていうと、じゃあそういうふうに振る舞おうかなっていう。
What makes Asami so harrowing and scary through the finale is that she's played with the exact same sweet, gentle affect and cadence that she's had throughout the film, only the context and what she's saying now is horrifying.
やっぱりじゃあその麻美っていう女性が自分にとってすごくしっくりと馴染むような感覚でやっぱり演じる、だから怖いことをやっているとか、だからこうホラー映画に出るっていう感覚っていうのは全くなくて、例えばそれがこう見てる人にとって怖く映ったり、自分自身はそう思わずにそこに立つことが一番大事なんではないかなと感じて現場に入りました。
I might get dragged for this by a lot of very traumatized viewers, but I also think that when it comes to the violence, in terms of what it does show you, it's actually relatively brief.
そんなには皆さんそうおっしゃられるんですけど、なかったですね。やっぱり
A lot of it is off-screen. There are like maybe 10 shots that push this movie past PG-13 and into NC-17 territory. I find myself thinking of the Scarface chainsaw scene, the Reservoir Dogs ear scene, or the Psycho shower scene. Many films in the intervening years of all three have shown way more on-screen gore. What makes those scenes linger is the context and the knowledge of what's happening. You barely need to see it. In Audition, it's the suddenness of the scene's implementation, our slowly built trust and emotional investment in the characters, the slow, labored build-ups and interruptions, the intensity of the sentiments Asami is expressing, and the power of the performances. He'd probably resent this comparison, but similar to what German filmmaker Michael Haneke accomplished with his thrillers like Cachet and Funny Games, what makes Audition so horrific is the empathy and psychology it brings to a Saw-like scenario.
どうしたの?
Watching it as a young man, I was like,
Tell that fucking bitch to chill! Chill that fucking bitch out!
but watching it now as an older man, I'm kind of like,
All right, now tell her it's gonna be all right.
It's gonna be all right.
Promise her.
I promise.
Tell her to chill.
not liking, but getting. When abuse is the only language you've ever known and loved, it's the one you use, and Asami endured a very hellish kind of abuse. She's always looking to validate the idea that someone's trying to or going to hurt her because of her trauma.
多分青山さんはきっと麻美にとっては自分以外のものや自分に関する以外のものの世界を持ち、他のものを愛するっていうことが受け入れることができない彼女の悲しさというか、自分だけを見ててほしいっていう、そうでないと自分を本当に愛してるとは、思えないっていう、やっぱり心の欠けた部分があるというか。
Miike didn't expect Audition to weather frequent walkouts and audiences berating him, nor did he expect it to become such an international hit. He thought the feelings explored in the film would be more recognized by Japanese audiences. Audition's success enabled him to be freer as a storyteller and to think less about the audience, leading to even more experimental and surrealistic cult hits in the years that followed. Miike insists that his best films are ahead of him, acknowledging that he struggles, like any artist, to revisit his past work. But for my money, this is not only his masterpiece, but one of the most brilliant films of the past 50 years. The Fatal Attraction routine hadn't been executed with this level of psychological complexity before, and hasn't been since. Very few commercial horror films before or since would take the risk of such a slow burn opening, or trade in violence less about fountains of blood than it is about pain, physical and emotional. Given the film's iconic imagery, the cat may be out of the bag as far as Audition's bait and switch. But even those diving in for the first time expecting a cult splatter film are sure to be surprised and challenged by the film's litmus test for empathy and two-sided exploration of gender roles.